Here's a really simple project of turning a toothpick holder. We do a little bit of hollowing, and we got some really simple techniques to do it with. I've already selected my stock. Let's get ready to mount it on the lathe. First, we'll use a center finder to mark the centers of the blink. With an X on the center, we can use a center punch. Mark a nice dimple. Then repeat the process on the other side. With the centers punched on both sides, we can mount it between centers. Make sure the tailstock's tight. Adjust the tool rest, and always rotate the piece by hand. Make sure that it clears. Here I'm just using a spindle roughing gouge to remove the corners. And you can always check your progress by feeling the back side. A couple of flat spots left. Now I'll use a parting tool, make a tenon on this end that we can grip with the chuck. Should hold nicely. Okay, I've mounted a self-centering 4-jaw chuck onto the lathe. Now I can mount my blink into the chuck by gripping on that tenon we turned earlier. Just tighten the jaws in place. Adjust the tool rest. Check to make sure that it clears, and we're ready to start turning. Now I'll use a spindle gouge to shape the top of the toothpick holder. Simply lay the gouge on its side a little bit, handle low, raise the handle. Perfect cut every time. I'm just looking for a nice dome shape to the lid. That looks nice. Now I can readjust the tool rest. We'll mark an 1 3/4 diameter tenon on the lid using a pair of calipers. And that's the line. Now I can use a parting tool to form a tenon to that line 1/4 of an inch long. Now I can sand this tenon. It'll be concealed later, so this is the opportunity to sand it. Now I can apply just a little bit of wax for a finish. Always use a paper towel when you're applying finish on the lathe. If you were to get a catch, the paper towel would shred rather than pull your hand into it. Now you've noticed that I haven't sanded the top of this. I'll tell you about that in just a minute. Now I'll reinstall the tailstock and install a drill chuck, which I've already equipped with a 3/8 inch Forstner bit and already taken the liberty to mark a depth with a piece of tape of 3/32 of an inch. I've also slowed the lathe down to 500 RPMs. Just going to drill a 3/8 inch hole here, 3/32 of an inch deep. This will form a recess for the pull we'll make later. Now I'll remove this chuck. And I'm going to drill a hole about a ½ an inch deep. I didn't mark this one because it's not real critical. Make sure that you stop often. Clear the chips, especially on a small bit like this. Now we're going to use a thin parting tool to part the lid off. I've sped the lathe back up to a normal turning speed. We want the lid to have about 1/8 of an inch thickness, and I want to leave about a 32nd of that tenon still mounted to the rest of the blank. Just work in small segments, down a little bit on one side, a little bit on the other. I've made the part about 1.5 times the width of the parting tool to give clearance on the sides. And as I get close, I can use my hand on the back side, held right at the center. It pretty much falls off in your hand. To sand the back side of the lid, get rid of any parting tool marks, I've applied some adhesive back sandpaper to a flat area of my workbench. Then I can just work that back and forth, working with the grain. And I usually flip it about halfway through, just in case I'm applying more pressure on one side than the other. Now I can apply a little bit of wax to that. Same wax I used earlier. Rub that into the surface. Wipe away the excess. Perfect.